Warning: the content of these videos contains adult themes which may be distressing. Viewer discretion is advised. Everything you are about to hear is taken from court documents, trial transcripts, and various media sources. Hello everyone, and welcome back to True Crime with Mystery Maverick. Today we are back in the city of Escondido, where we continue to follow the police investigation and delve into the interviews of the prime suspects as we try to unravel the mystery: who killed Stephanie Crowe? The brutal murder of Stephanie Crowe in her own bedroom had rocked the local community of Escondido, and investigators were anxious to apprehend the culprit as quickly as possible. It has been widely reported that early on the police had theorized that Stephen Crowe had killed his daughter. Stephanie, at 12 years old, was reaching puberty, and investigators thought he may have been sexually abusing her and killed her to silence her. The book She's So Cold describes that during Stephen's strip search, police seemed to be paying particular attention to his private parts, as if to see some kind of evidence of molestation. However, they had found Stephanie fully clothed, and the autopsy revealed no evidence that Stephanie had been sexually assaulted, and there were no signs of sexual activity whatsoever. Having established there was no forced entry to the Crowe property, police believed that someone in the house had to have been responsible for her murder. Moreover, they already had another suspect in mind. The family liaison officer, after spending time with the Crowes that morning, had reported that Stephanie's brother Michael was not behaving like the rest of the family. He would state in his report that Michael was not as emotional or visibly upset as the rest of the family. He would describe how Stephanie's parents were distraught, crying, and Stephen Crowe even becoming angry, saying he should have protected their daughter. On an episode of 48 Hours, the former prosecutor in the case, Summer Stefan, stated, "The behaviour of the brother seemed to be in contrast to the behaviour of the rest of the family. He was playing with some handheld game whilst the rest of the family were grieving." All this suspicion would lead to the second round of questioning for the young teen, and on the 22nd of the 1st, 1998, Detectives Han and Risley would pay Michael a visit at the Polinsky Children's Centre. Detective Risley would read Michael his rights and continue the interview without his parents or a lawyer present. This time, Michael would be asked to give a detailed chronology of the day before and leading up to his sister's murder. As before, Michael reiterated the normal activities of that day and the comings and goings of the family members and events. He further added that his best friend Josh had called him around 3 p.m, as he did most days. This information piqued investigators' interest, as they had already received preliminary findings showing that expert blood spatter and crime scene reconstruction analysis had indicated that more than one person had to cooperate to successfully hold the comforter over Stephanie while the other person stabbed her. They would drill down on this and prompt Michael for more information. Who was Joshua? Was he close to Michael? Close enough to help him kill his sister? Risley would discuss with Michael some of the difficulties they were having with the investigation. How could someone from outside the home get in? Michael suggested the screen on Stephanie's window had occasionally been used as an entry route when people were locked out. Risley would further inform Michael that several strands of hair were found in Stephanie's hand. "Do you feel confident that's not going to be your hair?" the detective asked. "The only way I can think it could be my hair is if, when we play around and tickle each other, but she never ripped out a handful of my hair. replied the confused teen. Police were confident that the hair was Michael's and that DNA testing would soon prove it. So I guess what I hear you saying is that those hairs in her hand could be yours? I really doubt it. She never reached out and ripped hairs from my head. Detective Ham would later ask Michael about Stephanie's friends and acquaintances before ending the interview with the customary phrase, "If you remember anything, no matter how small, it might be important, you will let us know." Risley would report the details of the interview back to Claytor and Sweeney. Detective Claytor grew even more suspicious of Michael when he learned from Risley that Michael had claimed to have woken up in the middle of the night and gone to the kitchen. They questioned how he hadn't seen his sister's body in her doorway when his room was right across from hers. That same day, Detectives Lanigan and Naranjo would return to the Polinsky Children's Center and escort Michael to the Escondido Police Department for further questioning. Detective Claytor, the lead investigator, along with Chris McDonough of the Oceanside PD, would interview Michael for the third time. This time they would employ methods of the read technique, creating a high-pressured environment where understanding and sympathy is given, followed with the promise of help and leniency only if a confession is given. They would go on to implement the 3 stages of the read technique, going over the facts of the case, then behavioural analysis, followed by a 9-step interrogation if the suspect is believed to be involved in the crime. Claytor would start the interview, asking Michael if he knew why he was there and telling him that he wanted his side of the story. By this time, and having been interviewed twice already, Michael said he kinda knew why he was there, but he didn't really know why he had to go over this again. He would ask Michael again if he had any idea who would want to harm Stephanie. Michael said no. "If you have anything to do with this, would you tell me?" inquired Claytor. "Yes," Michael replied. He would further ask Michael if he had told anyone, even in a jokingly way, that he was involved in his sister's murder. "No," replied Michael. "Have you talked to anyone about this other than the police officers?" Michael said he had only talked to a counsellor, and his friend Joshua. "What's Joshua's last name?" the detective asked. "Treadway," replied Michael. Claytor would tell Michael that investigators were thoroughly searching the Crowe home, and he would ask Michael to keep that in mind as the interview continued. Claytor would ask him how he felt the morning Stephanie's body was discovered. Michael described seeing Stephanie's blood-soaked t-shirt and then quickly turning away and going into the front room, laying on the sofa and crying. He then remembers the police coming and taking him and his family to the police station, being questioned for, quote, 9 hours before being taken to the Polinsky Children's Center. Claytor asked Michael to back up a bit to the part where Michael had awoken at 4:30 in the morning. Again, Michael would go over the events. He had awoken with a headache and gone to the kitchen to get some Tylenol and milk, then returned to his room. Claytor would zero in on this information, believing Michael should have seen or heard something if he was telling the truth. He asked Michael about the bedroom doors in the home and whether they were open or shut. Michael said all the internal doors in the house were shut, apart from the bathroom door. Michael further explained that the lights in the hallway were off and he had left his bedroom light on with the door ajar. Claytor then asked Michael about the pounding he had said he'd heard earlier that night. Michael thought the pound had started before midnight, as he hadn't long been asleep. It seemed to be coming from the laundry room door, as he had heard a vibrating on the glass, which was coming from that direction in the house. He would further ask Michael if there was any reason why his hair would be in Stephanie's hand after her murder. Again, Michael said no. The detective then left the room to observe Michael's reaction to this line of questioning. When he returned, Claytor would tell Michael they really wanted to believe him and offered him the chance to take a voice stress analyzer to prove to them he was telling the truth. A voice stress analyzer is a computerized instrument that measures tremors in the throat when a person talks and translates them onto a graph. The test claims to use these readings as an accurate measure of truth. Michael agreed to take the test. "You look disgusted," said Claytor. "I told you before I wouldn't lie," said Michael. "What's the problem, Mike?" Claytor replied. "I spent all day away from my family. I couldn't see them. I feel like I'm being treated like I killed my sister, and I didn't. It feels horrible, like I'm being blamed for it. Everything I own is gone. The only thing I have had for today is my sister Shannon. Other than that, everything I have is gone, everything. You won't even let me see my parents. It's horrible," replied Michael. At this point, Claytor had to pull back Michael's trust, so he fired back. "Mike, you need to trust me on this. This is going to work out. What we're after and what's important is that we get to the truth in the matter. Like I told you, I'm not blaming anyone. We want to believe what you're telling us, okay?" "Okay," responded Michael. Claytor would leave the room once again to observe Michael. He then returned to the room, this time with Detective Chris McDonough in tow. He introduced McDonough to Michael, and Michael was informed that McDonough would be performing the truth verification test. McDonough, a self-proclaimed celebrity investigator, began with a friendly approach, explaining he had a son of a similar age to Michael and implying he had an interest in Michael's talents and hobbies. They talked for a long time about computer games, what strategies were employed, which ones Michael liked and how good at them he was. He asked what subjects Michael was interested in at school and what books he liked to read. McDonough asked about Michael's circle of friends, who were they and how close they were to him. Michael said he only had a few close friends, and one, Aaron Hauser, that he had recently had a falling out with. He asked Michael how his relationship was with his family and if he had any problems with his parents and or siblings. The only conflict Michael described was when his grades were slipping because of failing to hand in assignments, and his mum would ground him and take away his privileges. He goes on to say that his mum's style of discipline had actually worked, and he had started catching up as a result. He explained that sometimes his sisters were whiny, but other than trivial arguments, mostly between his two sisters, he thought the world of his family. He said that he liked everything about his sister Stephanie, that she was a real people person, very popular amongst her peers and always winning awards. McDonough explained to Michael the workings and applications of the voice stress analyzer and boasting about its accuracy in determining the truth, and they would formulate the questions of the test together. He suggested several questions to Michael such as, "Do you know who took Stephanie's life?" and asked if he thought they were fair questions to ask during the exam. He then read Michael the voluntary release form and asked Michael to sign it before proceeding with the examination. Once the examination was over, McDonough confronted Michael with the results and telling him that he failed important questions that indicated his involvement. He asked Michael if he was blocking out what happened and that he subconsciously killed Stephanie without knowing it. This line of questioning was employed to extract a confession from Michael by seemingly diminishing his culpability and responsibility of the crime. Michael told the detective he had no idea why the test was saying he was lying, and that he knew from the beginning they were going to try and blame him. McDonough would continue applying pressure on Michael, asking him why the test would show he was being deceptive. Michael would begin to cry. He had no idea why the test had shown he had lied when he hadn't, and continued to insist he had no involvement and or knowledge of Stephanie's death. He offered Michael tissue and left the room as Detective Claytor returned. Claytor informed Michael it would be impossible for the person who did this not to get blood on themselves, and that he had found Stephanie's blood in Michael's bedroom. Claytor took a more accusatory tone when he told Michael they believed he was the one who killed his sister. He then went on to ask Michael what he had done with the knife after he had murdered her. "What? God, I don't know, I didn't do it. I swear to God," Michael pleaded with the detective. Claytor would continue grilling him, and Michael would profess his innocence. Claytor told Michael that people make mistakes, and even good people make mistakes sometimes. Doesn't make them a bad person. He said that what really matters is that people own up to their mistakes and do the right thing in the end. Still, Michael would continue to profess his innocence. As the interrogation continued, Michael was almost physically sick. "I can help you get through this," insisted the detective. "We can get through this together." Michael said he was so confused by this point he couldn't remember and didn't know what to think anymore. Claytor used this to convince Michael that he might have blacked out, and that's why he couldn't remember. Claytor would once again leave the room. This time Michael was questioning God. "How could I have done this? Why, God? Why? I don't deserve to live. Oh God, why?" McDonough would end the interview, and Michael was returned to the Children's Centre for the evening. A psychiatric nurse at the centre would later testify that Michael was psychologically traumatised and emotionally exhausted upon his return. The very next day, Detectives Claytor and Risley would interrogate Michael for a fourth time, which would last for approximately 6 hours. They would go over everything that they had in the previous interviews, and Claytor would hone in on Michael's interest in fantasy games and novels. He suggested that Michael had alternate personalities and that the bad side of those was responsible for the murder of Stephanie. That explained why Michael couldn't remember, but that the crime scene evidence pointed to him. After 3 hours of grueling questioning, Michael would start to break. Investigators told Michael they knew Stephanie had been moved and asked him why he had moved her. It was clear by this point that police believed that he had killed Stephanie, and Michael eventually agreed that he could have picked her up and moved her. Detectives convinced Michael that he indeed was Stephanie's killer and offered him the opportunity of penning a forgiveness letter to her. The letter read in part, "Dear Stephanie, they are putting me through hell, and I think that's what I deserve. If I did do this, then I am insane. The only way I know I did this is because they told me I did. I want you to know I was not myself when I did this." They later divulged to Michael that they knew that his former friend Aaron Hauser had a lot of knives and asked if he had ever given Michael one. Michael denied ever being given any of the knives and said that Aaron was just a collector. Michael couldn't find a way out as they hammered him with questions. They implied if it wasn't him, it must be one of his family members, at which point he would literally break down on camera. He didn't want what was happening to him to happen to his loved ones. He knew how horrible this had been for him. Detectives would then leave the cameras running as they took a break, this time taking Michael with them, for 15 minutes off camera. In a later deposition, Michael would say that the detective had told him his parents believed he had killed his sister, and they never wanted to see him again. They told Michael they were all he had left now, and they could help him if he would just admit to killing his sister. When they returned, Michael's demeanour had changed. He was more agreeable to the detective's line of questioning. He described how he envied his sister and that she was smarter and more popular than he was. He described how he had enough, and that night he decided to kill her. He said he stabbed her 3 times and picked her up from the bed, dropping her on the floor. Throughout his so-called confession, Michael continuously said that he was lying, and that he would have to make it up, as he did not remember. At 11 p.m, Michael was formally arrested for the murder of his sister and taken to Juvenile Detention Centre to await his plea hearing. Still at the motel, the Crowe parents were in unimaginable agony. Their beautiful daughter had been taken so violently and senselessly, and their lives were changed forever. They hadn't seen or spoken to Shannon and Michael for 3 days, and they were physically, emotionally and mentally exhausted. Stephen Crowe would reportedly take sleeping tablets that night to escape from the nightmare that was now his reality. Just after midnight, the phone would ring as Stephen fumbled for the receiver in a daze. But what he was about to hear would soon overcome the power of even heavy sedatives. "Yes?" said Stephen in a croaky voice. "We've arrested a suspect," said the detective on the other end of the line. "It's your son." Stephen would then have to break the news to his wife Cheryl, who was inconsolable and began howling in despair. Stephen couldn't believe what he had just been told and phoned to speak with Michael. When he came on the line, he would ask his son outright, "Did you do it? Did you kill Stephanie?" Michael replied, "I don't know what to believe, Dad. They say I did." The next day, on the 24th of January, Cheryl and Stephen would go and visit him in the juvenile hall, where they found a frightened and sick Michael. By the time they had left, Stephen and Cheryl knew that Michael was innocent, and police had got it wrong. On January the 27th, less than a week after her murder, Stephanie would be laid to rest. On the morning of the funeral, Cheryl would beg police to allow Michael to attend his sister's funeral. "Let him come in shackles if you have to, but please let him be there." In the end, a sorrowful Shannon would have to prompt her mum into getting ready. "Come on, Mum, you need to get ready. We need to help Stephanie get to heaven." Over 600 people attended Stephanie's funeral at the Oak Hill Cemetery, including friends, neighbours and even complete strangers. People far and wide would mourn the loss of the beautiful, bright little girl. By this time, the local media was starting to whip up a frenzy, and despite the huge outpouring of sympathy for the Crowe family within the community, the whispers of suspicion were omnipresent. Despite this, police had uncovered no physical evidence linking Michael to the crime. No blood-soaked clothes and no murder weapon was found at the scene. Investigators believed that Michael could not have done this alone, and they started looking into Michael's small circle of friends. That afternoon, police would receive a phone call from Aaron Hauser's mum, claiming that one of Aaron's knives were missing from his collection. Claytor thought that he knew who had the knife and who was close enough to Michael to help Michael with the murder. That same night, after Stephanie's funeral and on his 15th birthday, Joshua Treadway would be driven to the Escondido Police Department by his parents at the request of the detectives. Joshua's interrogation would initially last 30 minutes, and Joshua would talk about his relationship with Michael Crowe and Aaron Hauser. He explained that he was close to Michael and that they were really close friends. Joshua wasn't so complimentary about Aaron. He said that the group had recently had a falling out after Michael had borrowed some games from Aaron and hadn't returned them. He went on to say Aaron had also accused Michael of taking $40 from his room when he had been in Aaron's home. As a result, Aaron had even stopped sitting with them at lunch. Joshua ultimately confessed to stealing the knife from Aaron's bedroom and hiding it under his bed. Detectives arrested Joshua for the theft and escorted him home, where they executed a search warrant on the Treadway home. After they had retrieved the knife from underneath Joshua's bed, they would escort him back to the police department for almost 24 hours of further questioning. Initially, Joshua had stuck to his original story, saying the knife he had stolen was not used in the murder. He added that Michael would not have hurt anyone, as he was too quiet and not that into gory content. Police would push for more information about the knife. Joshua claimed the knife could not have been used in Stephanie's murder, as it had been under his bed for weeks. He said he had taken it because he liked the look of it. Police implied to Joshua's dad that Michael and Aaron were responsible for the crime, and that they were trying to implicate his son as the fall guy. After hours of pleading to see his parents, Joshua's dad was allowed into the room to see his son. Believing his son was being framed, Joshua's dad urged him to give up his friends and save himself. Around 4:30 a.m, Joshua took the truth verification test administered by Detective McDonough. Joshua would continue to say that he stole the knife from Aaron and it had been under his bed the whole time. Once again, McDonough would inform Joshua that the results indicated he was lying. By 8 a.m. the next morning, exhausted and motivated by promises of leniency and lack of sleep, Joshua would admit that Aaron had given him the knife to hide after the murder and that he had no further involvement in the crime. The police, believing they now had enough to start building a case against the boys, finally allowed Joshua to go home. 2 weeks later, investigators would bring Joshua in for questioning. After more intense questioning, Joshua told the detectives that Aaron had confessed to him that he had helped Michael kill Stephanie and that he had asked him to hide the weapon. He told detectives that Michael didn't like Stephanie and that Michael and Aaron had planned her murder during school break times. He said he was scared of Aaron and that he had threatened him to keep quiet. Detectives told Joshua they believed he had more involvement, and after implying that as an accessory he would get less time, Joshua was beginning to relent. Joshua was put through a further 3 CVSA tests, and desperately looking for a way out, he eventually agreed with the detectives. He said he had walked over 3 miles to Aaron's house that night, and then they walked a further 2 miles to the Crowe home. Once there, Joshua said he went into the kitchen and acted as a lookout while the other 2 boys killed Stephanie. He said Michael had rinsed the blood off the knife and Aaron had given him the knife to dispose of. He then claimed he walked the 5 miles home, hid the knife under his bed and went to sleep. Joshua was now the second person officially arrested for Stephanie's murder. With Joshua's confession in hand, detectives had one more suspect in mind, the friend with the knife collection. In what can only be described as an undercover sting operation, detectives had Joshua call Aaron to implicate himself. Joshua would play along, telling Aaron that they were in deep trouble and needed a plan to get out of it. Aaron would become frustrated with Joshua and said even if Michael were guilty, they had done nothing wrong and it would be okay. At the direction of his father, and knowing he was telling the truth, Aaron consented to take the truth verification test too. Aaron, like the others, would deny any involvement in Stephanie's murder and became defiant and angry when detectives accused him. Police could not sway Aaron, and he refused to confess. On the morning of the 11th of February, police would execute a search warrant on the school locker of Aaron Hauser and later arrest him for the murder of Stephanie Crowe. Aaron would not be easy to crack as his friends. He told detectives that Michael wouldn't hurt anyone and that Joshua was a very quiet and peaceful character. McDonough would discuss serial killers to Aaron and how that lack of intelligence was usually why criminals got caught. He would go on to ask Aaron to give a hypothetical scenario of how someone might go about committing a crime like this. Aaron said he would have hid the knife in the pocket of his trousers and placed his hand over Stephanie's face while pulling her back and slashing her throat. He said that he would wear dark clothing so that as not to get blood on himself, and then destroy the evidence by burning it. He went on to offer the detective a possible entry route through a small window, as doors would likely be locked and or noisy. All the boys were arrested and sent to juvenile detention centres to await trial. A few days after Stephanie's funeral, Stephen and Cheryl would return home to find the house had been destroyed. Memories and projects made by Stephanie had been destroyed, and various personal items had been thrown in the empty swimming pool. That same day, the Crowe parents would be approached by their neighbour, Reverend Gary West. West would ask them if the police had investigated a transient that had been knocking on several doors the night of Stephanie's murder. The Crowes had no idea and had heard nothing from the police about this man. By this time, they were convinced that all three of the boys were innocent and would team up with Aaron and Joshua's parents and attorneys to prove it. On the next episode, we investigate the overlooked suspect and delve into the trials and tribulations that ensued as we try to unravel the mystery: who killed Stephanie Crowe?